Anybody that's feeling discouraged or they feel like they've gotten theirs halfway and they're just not feeling any inspiration to like push forward, take a step back and see like what are your weaknesses and really like own up to it, and then actually say what are your strengths, you know what I mean? Because you can't just be down on yourself all the time, right? I mean, as artists we do that plenty.
Back once again with the Pencil Kings podcast, and today we've got Simon Dyjas. I've been reaching out to members of the Pencil Kings community, and Simon was one of the people that I reached out to, and I was just blown away by the photography. And what I've come to learn is that Simon's doing way more than just photography, and so I'm really excited to have him on the line here today to talk about what he's working on, where he came from, and hopefully uncover some tidbits that you can take away and incorporate into your own artwork. Welcome to the call, Simon. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm pretty good, man. Thanks for having me.
I love talking to Pencil Kings members, and I'm excited to get more people on the call. So why don't you start off by telling people you're in the U.S. right now, correct? But you weren't originally from the U.S., so how did that happen?
I'm currently in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I came here about 25 years ago. I grew up in Poland under communism, and the Poland I remember was just very oppressed, and there wasn't much to be excited about. So anytime there was something colorful, even, I mean, you didn't really see much color in storefronts or anything like that. So there was this kid that my mom was friends with his dad, and his dad used to travel all the time, and he traveled in the Middle East and all this stuff. And one time he brought him this Amiga, and this 4-bit Amiga was the first computer I've ever seen. And I think I must have been 6 or 7 years old. I had never had anything like that. We didn't have a color TV until 1990, like right before I came here. So I grew up basically watching 2 state-controlled channels in black and white. So a lot of my eye is really in love with black and white. It's just kind of something that's always been with me. But anyway, so we got this Amiga, and it was this 4-bit Amiga. And this thing had this ridiculous tape drive. This was before hard drives and all that stuff. So we had to rewind this tape that would have whatever programs were on it. And for about an hour and a half, you had to wait, right? So we're like waiting patiently. Finally, this thing is ready. And he turns it on. It's just like this beautiful flicker of the pixel. I just fell in love with it. And, I came home and I was just like so bummed. I'm like, I can't get this stuff. I can't buy it here. So when I came to this country, I remember in the Philadelphia school district, I saw a Mac. There's an enrichment program, and only the enrichment program got to use these Macs. And I used to sneak into the lab just so I could use this thing, right? Because I didn't speak English, you know what I mean? I was, in ESL class. It was like, why is this kid going to use a computer now, right? So basically, I fell in love with the Mac. I love the aesthetic. It was just something drew me to it. It was just like, compared to the PC that we had in the classroom, which, we could use on Fridays or whatever, you were greeted with a black and white DOS screen. You started in this command interface, and I was just like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, I want to get to my stuff. I was using this Mac where you had to like boot from 2 floppies. And on the second disk, it was like, you can run Mac Paint. And I'm doing my spray can and all that stuff. And I fell in love with like graphical programs. Fast forward to like, we're about 6th grade, 7th grade. I finally get a Mac. I got this PowerPC 6100. The thing was beautiful. And I had this beautiful 13-inch monitor. And I could do ClarisWorks, and I was like doing these gradients. Later, I was in school, and I was just like going to all these shows and stuff. So I started like, why don't I just start doing flyers? And I started doing Photoshop. But it was like Photoshop 2.5. Most people don't know that Windows didn't get Photoshop until 2.5. And most people really kind of skipped 2.5. And so the popular one that really was the first one was 3.0, and it was the first one with layers. I mean, before that, you had like a selection, you had marching ants, you had one undo, there was no history. It's like you basically learn not to make mistakes, right?
Yeah. Wow, that blows my mind because I started with 3,
yeah,
and so I had no idea. And whenever I use programs that are like that, because those programs still exist sometimes, and where there's one undo, and you're like, what the?
And it's kind of funny because, when you think about it with Photoshop and Adobe, Photoshop was always their strong one. They were always wavering on the other programs. I mean, Illustrator was always fledgling, and it was freehand, and, all this PageMaker, and that was before Adobe bought PageMaker, and, Quark, and all these programs, and everything had such a niche. And it's so funny because this other company, Meta Creations, ended up dissolving, and all their banging interfaces and all that stuff ended up getting bought up by Macromedia, and Adobe bought a bunch of stuff too. But it's so funny because in the end now, Adobe has all the programs they ever wanted, because Macromedia basically, like, all the stuff that they took away from Adobe back in the day, Adobe ended up, like, absolving into itself eventually. There was this back and forth now. These days, like, there isn't really anything that, like, stops Adobe from doing whatever it wants. So it's kind of funny how, like, we are stuck using Adobe products, but now they have the Creative Cloud and everybody's, like, backlashing and people don't like having the connection and all these, but it's like, I work for a major agency in Philly. I'm their IT specialist. So I managed a lot of Creative Cloud accounts, and Adobe doesn't make it easy right now. From an IT perspective, it's beautiful. But I can understand how other people don't feel like paying, whatever the subscription fees. The nice thing is that these days you don't have to worry about constantly updating stuff and it breaking and all these serial numbers and putting all that stuff in. You have one login and you can basically have all your Adobe apps.
It sounds like I started just a few years after you. But back then, software costs were really prohibitive.
And you had to do whatever you needed to do to get a hold of those software. I mean, back in the day, when Adobe was, like, trying to, like, become king, it was, like, ridiculous. Their stuff was so unattainable, yet there was no real good way for, like, people, like, that are coming up and learning how to use their software to really get the experience. So people ended up pirating most of that stuff, and it became the norm. It wasn't even thought of pirating. It was just like, that was the only way. And Adobe just flourished from that. I mean, they can pretend whatever that it was piracy, but it's like, that was the thing that propelled them where they are. It was the only way you could learn these programs, because you couldn't just assume you're going to go work for some place that uses that. So you go to a print shop, and most of the time, you're not going to have time to learn it on the job. These people need you to work, and you had to be right on it, In high school, with photography, I started taking film classes, and we used to, we learned how to process everything. Everything was still in film. But I was already so much into digital that I started, getting into scanning. I started scanning everything and started experimenting with scanners, using scanners as cameras. Have my sister, like, put her face, like, right on the scanner, open up the lid and just scan this thing. And it would just come up with the most beautiful images. But my sister was a photographer, so I never really wanted to, be like, oh yeah, I'm a photographer too in this family, But once I went to art school, I started experimenting with 3D. I was doing a multimedia program, and web was part of that. Flash was the thing to do, and everybody was doing Flash sites, and it was the most annoying thing. But, I got heavily into drawing classes and doing anatomy stuff in art school. And back then, when I was a kid, I used to draw all the time. And for me, to be able to digitize the drawings and start manipulating them in Photoshop and all kinds of stuff, and to do, like, that rudimentary stuff was very important, because it allowed me to finally start drawing in a digital environment. With the drawing, I never really pursued all those, like, angles that always, like, bothered me, like all my, like, shortcomings with drawing, because I was always the kind of person that had, like, a vision, like, way before I could really, like, put it down or, like, conceptualize it on paper. That was, like, my limiting factor. Basically, like, I jumped into all this technology, like, way too fast, and I forgot to hone my skills with my hands. Like, aside from being in virtual environments, like, I needed the physical space. I also do models. Like, I play Warhammer 40K and all that nerdy stuff. My father forced me to work for his painting company. I applied all those things I learned on a larger scale, doing, like, much smaller scale stuff, like smaller tools and specializing. I can build shelves. I can, rehab your whole house. The analog sense of actually, like, feeling what you're doing and holding the tools and being able to control them. It's no different than holding a mouse and a Wacom pad.
I just want to stop you there for a second, Simon, because you said something that I think is really interesting about the vision. You had a vision of what you wanted to do, and so you skipped ahead instead of honing in on these foundation skills, or I'm not sure exactly how you put it, but I was curious about this vision, and if you could tell us a little bit about that, because I feel like a lot of people that I've talked to have things in their head that they feel like there's a disconnect between their head and their hands, and they can't quite get it out.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you went through the same thing, and if you could just talk to us a little bit about your experience with that.
That's a very good point. And I'm sure a lot of people have trouble with this, because, our vision and how we kind of channel it through our hands is very different. And most people execute it in many different ways because they have to come up with their own ways to get there, right? Like for example, like I might be messy on my desk just because I don't have all my stuff put away, but that doesn't mean like I always want to get messy. So that was like one thing for me, like being in a digital space and being able to actually like, to get like a Cintiq is like a dream for me, but like, I don't have the money. So, I have like a pro medium tablet now. So I've forced myself to like unlearn my limitations with my hand and really practice with the stylus and getting the spatial, the 1.1 ratio where your hand is. I'm left-handed, so when I'm holding the stylus, I wanted the stylus to reach the point on the screen when I actually touched it. And I didn't like the hover it's like when I was not touching the stylus and I'm like, a couple millimeters away from the surface, it's still recognizing that the stylus is there. I wanted it to be totally tactile, like a pencil, where as soon as I touched it, it would recognize it and draw with me in my speed of my hand, which is kind of funny because the human interface devices that we've been using with our computers have not really changed for a really long time, which is why, iPads and things like that are really awesome. So I think that's helping a lot of people. More tactile devices are definitely helping people because, with it, you can touch it and you can do a 3D rotation and you can spin a globe or whatever. It's like that new, that Microsoft headset coming out is going to be super cool. And I'm glad Microsoft is turning around and actually doing something good, but, that's going to be really cool because you're going to be able to have a, overlay, and it's not really VR. It's, it's augmented. So you're in your same room and objects actually like determine where your furniture is and they know how to avoid them and detect them and how to interact with them. And you can actually just like, put your hand in something and do kind of like, Minority Report pseudo thing. I know everybody's like talking about this, but so once we can get them to like be like, very light wireless glasses, that they're not actual computers housed, mini computers like housed in the headset. So I think that's always bringing people back is like taking people out of their natural environment and expecting them to like, augment themselves through like the technology. There's plenty of people that will get in that, but it's not really good. I think the best kind of technology is the technology that's not really obstructing in the way you're doing your work. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I look at all these glasses now and the augmented reality and whatnot. And I got a chance to try an Oculus Rift about a month ago. And I'm just thinking, what we actually need is contact lenses that we can wear, because to the idea of putting something on my head, it's fine if I'm sitting down or if I'm in this controlled environment. And yeah, they do have these little glasses things, but it's going to get to be contact lenses. It just has to be.
Yeah.
I have something more. Something none of your dry as dust professors and routine-ridden doctors have. Love, devotion, passion.
So Simon, before we got on the call here, you wanted to talk about the idea of unity and your experience with bringing so many, like you just mentioned that you can remodel houses, which is a whole other art form in itself. So you have so much experience. It's like you're your own melting pot of all this, these creative mediums. And so what do you do with that, or how do you process that, or how do you use that for your advantage? Because I feel that because you have so much experience with this, a lot of people have bits and pieces, but through your experience, maybe they can relate some things to themselves and realize where they may have strengths by pulling in different influences and pulling in different pieces to create something that's bigger than just focusing on one tiny little aspect of themselves.
My own individual melting pot, huh? That's pretty funny. But no, you bring up a very good point too. And I consider myself a multimedia artist because that's the only thing that makes sense for me. Like I'm into way too many genres to ever like limit myself. And, I love music videos. I grew up in the 80s, and I've always wanted to, do music videos, for example. So I love to direct. I love to produce. I've done some of that stuff. I really enjoy it. At this level where I've brought so many things together over the past couple of years, even, at my age, I feel like the best times are the ones where you can like really start connecting the dots. And you do have to work hard, but the whole idea is to never limit yourself. And I think that some people have issues with that because we're so like trained from early on as kids, like it depends if you get into these like paradigms, like what do you do? It's like, all right, I go to high school, then college, then get a job, and hopefully you succeed and you're like climbing some ladder, right? But there doesn't have to be any ladder. The ladder should be in your head that you're climbing, not on the outside world. Like, you should always be developing yourself. And, so many people just are so like beat down by their everyday jobs, even though they might be totally creative and have a total like, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do that challenge, right? That drawing challenge. But it's like my job just totally drained me today, right? So it's like, you don't have any energy. You come down, to your house and you get on your couch and you watch TV, right? And next day you're doing the same thing and it's over and over. It's when when you never really take the time to hone those skills and really work on them, because, even if you always wanted to draw, if you're not going to spend those hours like doing the anatomy, challenges or the quizzes or just doing like whatever creative projects you have, you're never going to develop those skills. And, for me, even like, I build models and all that stuff. And it's like, I've always done that. I've done that since the 4th grade. But there's been times in my life where I just had like no time to work on them. And it's, it's very intensive. There's a lot of painting, you're airbrushing and all this stuff. And you end up collecting all this plastic and you never have time to do anything with it. It's the same with like a lot of artists. Like, they'll start buying books, like, buy all the spectrums, get all the Imagine Effects specials and all the magazines. But it's like, they're like looking through it like all day long on their spare time. But then they come home and they don't really like have the motivation to actually start working on that, because most people don't know where to start. And things like Imagine Effects, things like Pencil Kings, those are like perfect places to start, because not only do you have the community of people that are starting, you can feel comfortable that nobody's going to like make fun of you or like look at your drawing weird or whatever, because we all start out the same spot. I know a lot of like tattoo artists, for example, that airbrush and then they get into graphic design and, suddenly they're like, merging all these skills, and they're making a killing, it's like they never have a problem with clients. They're constantly busy. And it's because they're able to like merge a bunch of fields, which normally you would have back in the day very specialists in, And with photography, it's very important for me to mention this, because for the longest time, I was in the shadow of my sister being a photographer, and I kind of was in her shadow my whole life, just basically like whatever music she was into, I was into. So that's why I grew up in the 80s and I was into all that stuff, right? Normally I wouldn't have been influenced by that, but so I give her a lot of credit for that. But at the same time, I saw her stagnate in a way where she didn't hone her skills enough. It was like somebody told her there's only like 5 things you need to learn, right? And like her class, and when she went to art school, was the first class to actually like in Philly to like start using Photoshop at like 2.0. And she had like very rudimentary Photoshop intro, and it made her feel good and everything like that. But back in the day, it was all film, and it took her forever just to convert to digital. And I'm like, convert. Like, it's just like film is dead in that regard, where we have to move forward. This is the way, you know what I mean? It took her forever. And by that time, like, she turned around, it was like everything surpassed her. And she had to like to do this crazy catch up, which meant, a lot of her images just weren't up to par to things that people were doing that were using Photoshop for years. So she had this like big learning curve. Like, I've always tried to stay ahead of the game, and I've been around long enough to see all these developing technologies actually come to fruition. So, and I use all of them, and, I have multiple monitors and I actually calibrate them. And because I used to do print, so that's why. Photography, for me, it was just one thing I was into, and it's just one element, because you can draw, you can storyboard, you can come up with your own concepts, you can pencil it in, you can market it in, you can do it digitally. It's all about practice, like, I mean, I used to suck. Like, I wouldn't show my work to anybody, like I did so much stuff, but like nobody ever saw it. And I could never do a portfolio because of that. What do you do with a portfolio? Most people choose like too many images or too many mediocre images just to fill in spots, you know what I mean? Because they don't have enough strong stuff. It's like, those are the things you need to focus on. Anybody that's feeling discouraged, or they feel like they've gotten theirs halfway and they're just not feeling any inspiration to like push forward. It's like, take a step back and see like, what are your weaknesses, and really like own up to it and be like, what am I really weak at? Like, and then actually say, what are your strengths? You know what I mean? Because you can't just be down on yourself all the time, right? I mean, as artists, we do that plenty. But it's like always keep those equal, because as much as we are down on ourselves and it's very hard, and, you know, designers at work and, you know, critiqued all the time, and sometimes you got to do things like 10 times over before it's good, right? But it's like, those are the things like you should do, like learn to fail better. I love that, you know?
Fail better and definitely fail faster.
Yeah, and fail faster. And every time you just like get up and you're like, all right, on to the next one, right? It's like, it doesn't matter, because it's pointless. It's so pointless to focus on that negative and whoever somebody else is saying. Like, screw that. You're always going to have haters. You're always going to have people that are going to have an opinion. But you know what? If you're producing content, if you feel like you are, as an artist, you're a producer, then screw the haters. Because the haters, all they do is critique. They don't produce content. They have no idea what it takes to be an artist. All the agonies, all the good times, all the highs, all the lows, all that stuff. They have no idea. So you can't concentrate on what people think. It's like putting yourself and making yourself vulnerable is actual strength. And putting your artwork out there and improving it every single time, and keep finding the holes, keep finding the weaknesses, you know? And it's very important to find a decent mentor, maybe if you're lucky, you know, or somebody you look up to, and to have like a very objective and neutral point of view, you know, because last thing you want is like surround yourself with all these people that are going to be constantly be like, oh yeah, man, your work is great. Is like, that's not what just challenging, you know what I mean? That's like what makes people like stop and think like, oh yeah, I've gotten to a good spot. It's like, never do that. Never do that. Like, you're never going to be in a good spot, because you know what? As good as it comes, there's going to come a job or some project that you're going to have a big difficulty in, because you have some holes to fill. And instead of like freaking out about it, like focus on those holes beforehand. Like, you know, don't tackle projects that you know you're not going to be able to do, unless you know that, yeah, it's going to be hard, but like, I'm going to be able to like take this and break it down to parts and actually handle it. At the same time, it's like, it's up to you to really focus on like all those things you really want to be strong at. And eventually, even the jack of all trades is forced to, you know, focus and narrow it down. And for me, it's multimedia, you know? It's kind of funny, you know? For me, it's always been the flicker of the pixel. I love it. I love anti-aliasing. I can never have enough of it. You know, playing games, I remember when the graphics were getting better and you could do anti-aliasing and 4x sampling and all that stuff. Beautiful. I love crisp pixel. I love high resolution stuff. Retina displays, whatever the gimmickal name is, love them. It's really, the unity of it all is, it's not going to happen overnight. And depending on what business you're getting into, whether it's illustration or photography or whatever, it's going to take years to hone those skills. And actually, there's going to be plenty of pitfalls and plenty of decisions that were probably not the best ones or whatever, but they are the decisions that you make at the time. And, you know, you make them as best informed as you possibly can. And that's what you got to go with, and get up and do it again and do it better next time. I take my positivity from the satisfaction I get when, you know, I finished up retouching some image, or I did some illustration or whatever, or I did some kind of composite or something that took like many different genres to like complete, you know, that is like a little goal that you've completed for yourself. And those are the things that keep me going. It's very hard to do that duality with the work during the day, and, you know, it kills most people's motivation. So
yeah, definitely.
It's all about how much time you put into it. You know, if you come home and you're tired, you know, get a coffee and go and draw and lock yourself somewhere. So, you know, maybe the kids or the dogs are not, you know, bugging you. A lot of the times people don't get to where they want because they put a lot more emphasis on other things. And sure, we have all our priorities, you know. I can't speak like people don't have hardships, of course. But as far as you as an artist and wanting to pursue that and actually expecting that there's going to be results, you have to just keep going at it. And, you know, I took breaks from drawing all the time. And with Pencil Kings, it's actually like been, not to like, you know, plug it or anything, but it's like, it's made it exciting again. And it's made it also where I can really come back at any time because I can just go back to the videos I haven't watched. It's, I don't have to feel bad about like, you know, oh, I didn't do this challenge for like 20 days in a row and I missed all this stuff and I'm behind and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it.
Like there's a balance that has to be had, because I know there's a lot of people that they have the dream, but they don't have the drive. now I feel like my job is to instill some of that drive, to help people, to give them a reason, that you come home after work, you're tired, but to give people something fun to do, put them in a community of people that are doing this, and then just see what happens. And still kind of like tweaking and refining the process. But for me now, this is my art, is like, how do I motivate artists to, some people, they'll go on to have professional careers, but mainly, I want people to just have art as something that's in their lives where they can enjoy it. It doesn't have to be a source of shame or personal hatred or anything. It's a way for you to express yourself, whether you show up publicly, whether you just do it for yourself. But it's something that, it's part of you. And I want to let people know that it's okay. We should wrap this call up, Simon. So why don't you tell people where they can see some of your artwork and any closing remarks that you want to get out there before we call it a day?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I'm not surprised about people not really honing art right now, because it's very hard for people to take art seriously as something that they think they can do for a living. Like the first thing to go, it's like, oh, I have a budget. Oh, what's your art budget? All right, we need to cut this. It's just like, it's not necessary. It's so necessary for us as a society, to be inspired by things and actually like be happy about things and to bring that creativity. I think everybody has a creative side to them, depending on what path they've been on their life. Maybe they've been told that they haven't been creative, or that they're not allowed to be because they need to be a banker or some other, whatever. I think talent is like the most misused word. I think it's all about practice and about wanting to be somewhere and getting there. I think if you're really good at something, is because not only because it comes easy to people. I think a lot of people mistaken talent for that. I think it's because people really spend whatever time they want on things that are the most important to them. You can't expect to be a good artist if you're not going to put in the time, because I think it's all down to practice. I've seen people that were constantly saying like, I'm not creative. I'm like, you know what? Come to the Philadelphia Sketch Club with me. And after a couple weeks, man, they were coming up with some really amazing stuff. If you want to draw, if you're doing Pencil Kings, if you're only doing Pencil Kings, but it's like, find those like local sketch places where people of like mind like get together, and nobody makes you feel bad about whether you're good or not or anything else like that. That's a really good place to start. So anyway, so thanks for having me, man, and thanks for having me rant and everything.
No, it's good. I think we touched on a lot of really important things, as well as some of the history for people that maybe got into computers in just the last couple of years. That there's this huge long history where everything came from. And Simon, what's your website? Can you spell it out for people so if they want to check out some of your photography and some of your other artwork, that they can go there?
Yeah, sure. www.simondyjas.com, and I have an Instagram that's Simon_Dyjas.
Awesome. And we'll have this recording as well as some show notes and links to everything at pencilkings.com/SIMON-DYJAS. So thank you so much, Simon. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'll see you listeners in another week. Take care.
All right, man. Thank you.
Demands patience, skill, years of practice.
You talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.
If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could hit the 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio and leave us a little comment about what you thought about this.